Good afternoon, everyone. I mean, it's really strange for me standing here because it's my first in-person event since February 2020. So this is a strange experience after being on so many Zoom calls and team calls and all of these. So really delighted to be here in Milan. So good afternoon to you, those of you who've joined us here, and also greetings to others who've joined us virtually from other parts of the world. And we have over 200 people watching this live as well. So my name is Danish Dinesh. I work for the CGIAR's Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Research Program as Head of Partnerships and Outreach. So we're one of the hosts of this event, the other host being the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So we've been working closely with the UK FCDO over more than a year now on a campaign to transform agricultural innovation for people, nature and climate. Why is this? So we found that about $50 to $70 billion are spent every year on agricultural innovation, just in the global south. Of this, only 7% actually focuses on climate change and environmental objectives. This is not acceptable. If we have to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement goals, agriculture is a crucial sector, and if agriculture needs to step up, we need to innovate in agriculture more effectively, and we need to fill that innovation gap. So that's the reason that we've come together with the UK FCDO on this campaign. And this morning somebody was asking me, what is this ClimateShot? And our belief is that if we need to innovate in the face of this crisis, we need to think beyond business as usual. And ClimateShot is a term that we've come up with to capture that ambition. It seeks to go beyond business as usual and step up to the challenge of climate change in agriculture and innovation. So that's a bit of the context. And we seek to do this in 4 ways. And I'll make it really simple. First is to increase the level of investment in agriculture research and innovation. Second is to do research and innovation better. And you're going to hear from Bruce Campbell about how we can do that today. Third is how can we get the research and innovation that's out there to scale? And you'll hear from Lisa Sweet on that. And finally, it's about inclusive dialogue. And that's crucially important. And that's why we have Ayman from Egypt joining us today, who's actually coordinating the G77's agriculture position in the UNFCCC. So bringing countries together around this crucial issue of agriculture. So we'll get some of these great perspectives today in this event. So to welcome us and set the scene, I would like to invite Her Majesty's Ambassador to Italy and San Marino, Jill Morris. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce this extremely important pre-COP side event. A very warm welcome to you all, to Milanecki, to UK House, to our distinguished panel. Thank you very much for taking part, and to our audience also joining us online from around the world. Now, before I hand over to our panel, I'd like to begin by setting out what's brought us here together today, starting with the context for this discussion. Today's theme is All for Climate, because we are all in this together. It's about the public and the private sector, as well as civil society taking action across all sectors. And today we're going to be speaking, of course, about the agricultural sector, in particular, the power of innovation for transforming our agricultural systems. Now, the UK government has committed throughout its COP26 presidency to drive greater climate ambition to protect and restore ecosystems and to shift towards more sustainable agriculture. The UK COP26 presidency will work with partners to reform the trade in global agricultural commodities so that it rewards sustainable, deforestation-free production. The climate change crisis is a major threat to our food systems. Rising temperatures are reducing the productivity of agricultural lands, but it's also these very food systems which contribute to the global climate emergency, producing as much as a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to invest in food systems that can adapt, while also cutting emissions and tackling the nature crisis. Transforming our relationship with nature and land use offers huge benefits, but is also very challenging. A transition on this scale requires global cooperation, particularly between the producers and the consumers of agricultural commodities. It also critically requires the active participation of citizens, including indigenous peoples, local communities, smallholders, investors, businesses, and civil society, but also, vitally, young people, as we have seen over the last couple of days here in Milan during the Youth for Climate event. Young people, of course, are amongst those most affected by climate change and the threat to food systems. And yesterday, we supported an official side event to the Italian government's Youth for Climate. In the lead up to this event, over 100,000 young people pledged to act for food and act for change. And we're responding with the Global Action Agenda for Innovation in Agriculture to catalyse the transformation that young people and many others are calling for. And our response needs to be not just about cutting emissions to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, but also putting adaptation on an equal footing, adapting to protect communities and natural habitats. Also, the subject of today's discussion, how agriculture and food systems can be made more resilient by accelerating agricultural innovation. In 2015, also here in Milan, there was the World Expo with the theme Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life, with an emphasis on technology and innovation. And we're delighted to see that very conversation 6 years later continuing here. And this ClimateShot event also joins the dots between the COP26 and last week's UN Food Systems Summit, and enables us to identify the key areas for action, to unlock the level of investment, engagement, and collaboration that can transform food systems to deliver for people, nature, and climate. In New York last week, more than 150 countries made commitments to transform their food systems, and that's critical. Critical to support the 3 billion people globally who are malnourished, and protecting the resource base on which global livelihoods rely. And there's more. Demand for food will continue to rise in coming years. 56% more food is needed by 2050, as the world's population is forecast to increase to 9 billion and beyond. So we cannot achieve this level of ambition without increased investment in agriculture, innovation, and research and development to rapidly develop practical solutions. Reducing the innovation gap requires a 3-step approach: investment, collaboration, and partnerships. Investments. Today, the global amount of annual public investment in agriculture is an incredible $700 billion, $700 billion. But only 6% of that is spent on innovation. This is nowhere near enough for the transformation that food systems need to meet the challenge of climate change. So number one, we need to prioritise investment globally and target investment at innovation. Secondly, collaboration. The international research agenda has often been fragmented and supply-oriented. We need to focus on impact and prioritise the need of end users, whether farmers or businesses working along value chains or policy makers. So secondly, collaboration. And then thirdly, building partnerships is more important than ever to deliver action on agricultural R&D and innovation. If we share success and failures and learn together, we will be better equipped to deliver and bring to scale agriculture innovation. So 3 priorities there: investments, collaboration, and partnerships. And the Global Action Agenda on Agricultural Innovation addresses just these challenges by setting a joint vision and a common goal to drive a just rural transition. So this pre-COP session today is a unique opportunity to bring together the food and the climate agendas and act for our COP26 efforts to transform agricultural innovation systems for people, nature and climate. And I want to thank you all very much for being part today of this incredibly important conversation. Thank you very much. E buon lavoro. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Jill, for that vision and helping us get to where we need to be in terms of climate change and food, connecting those two important agendas and many others. But I'd like to point out one specific thing that you mentioned, which is connecting with the young people. And I would like to acknowledge that we have Stephanie and Sophie here, who are two ambassadors of the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign. And it's really great that we are connecting with what the young people are asking for in the lead up to the COP in this transformation agenda. So thank you for highlighting that as well. So now I would like to turn to our next speaker, who's my boss, our director, Bruce Campbell. So he's the director of CGIAR's Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Research Program. And I mean, I'll make this a bit personal. So I started working about 7 years ago for CCAFs. And the first thing I heard from Bruce was outcomes. So he's a researcher, he's director of a research program. We are evaluated based on publications, but Bruce evaluates us based on the development outcomes that we achieve. And for 7 years, almost every week, Bruce says this: outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. And Jill, you alluded to this. How can we be more useful for end users? And so I'm inviting Bruce now onto the stage to tell us about how we can actually do this. Over to you, Bruce.
Thanks. I'm hardly the boss for Dhanush. Dhanush is very independent. So it's fantastic to be at a live event again, even though it's a mixed event, and it is such a wonderful venue. Thank you to the UK government. 2021 is a crucial year to galvanize action. It's the UNFCCC, it's COP, the UN Food System Summit. It's a moment in history in bringing something together to change the course of the food system. So that's my first point. Second point is about the need for transforming the food system. And I'm not going to go on and on about it because I think we all need it. We all understand it. Two points from the agricultural sector. We emit 1/3 of the greenhouse gases total, and yet we've only got 20 to 40% of the technologies and tools to implement change to reach the targets. So we've got a very small set of agricultural practices that we can use to reach the targets that we have to achieve. That's on the emission side. On the adaptation side, if we're really serious about the SDGs, there's 500 million smallholder farmers at threat from climate change. And if we're serious about the SDGs, they have to be reached in the next 9 years in terms of climate information, advisories, new tools and practices to rise to the challenge of adaptation. There's no way the current agricultural system is going to meet the emissions and the adaptation goals, let alone nutrition, biodiversity, other really important goals as well. So we need to transform the food system. The third point is that innovation is going to be a crucial part of that transformation, but the innovation systems that we've got are not fit for purpose. So why is innovation crucial? Well, if we've only got 40% of the tools to change the emissions profile, we need massive innovation in terms of how we're going to do it. If we're going to reach 60 million farming households in Africa with climate advisories in the next decade, we need way different extension systems, digital tools. We need to reach very farm-specific information to farmers in remote areas. That needs enormous amount of innovation. But why is it not fit for purpose? And we've heard about some of the words from others already. Scientists are wonderfully individualistic and creative, but it doesn't produce goods in general, it doesn't produce goods for society. So, for example, it's the publish or perish phenomenon. We need to roll out the papers in order to survive in the science world. So then I think, okay, I'll work on this, it'll give me some good papers, I'm not thinking about society at all. Or another approach is, there's a problem, I know the solution, I'll fix it, and then I'll give the problem to somebody else. No thought of co-creation and partnerships and thinking what is needed. So it's very supply-driven science. And then the metrics for scientists. So how are you evaluated? You evaluate on the number of publications you produce and the amount of citations that you get from those publications. It doesn't produce outputs for society. It just produces outputs for the science world. In agricultural paper that I produce or somebody produces is on average only cited 5 times. So in other words, I spent 5 months doing something and then 5 people pick it up and use it. Do we want thousands of papers like that which are not used? So the fourth point is that innovation can be a crucial solution, but we have to change business as usual in innovation systems. And it comes back to some of your words as well, working with stakeholders. What is the problem? What are ambitious targets? Let's say 60 million farmers in Africa have to have climate advisories within the next decade. Working with the stakeholders, how are we going to achieve it? What is the impact pathway to do it? What is the science that's needed to bring into that mix? Doing the science is then a little part of the whole innovation pit, but even the science, co-creating with your beneficiaries. And then finally, when you've got the products, being really committed to capacity strengthening so that the products can be used, creative communications. At the moment, we spend 90% of our work on science. We need to spend 30% on engagement and partnerships, 30% on the science perhaps, and 30% on making it get out into the world, working with people to make it work. And then changing the metrics, and Danush has already said it. For the last 10 years, we've not measured any of the scientists that we've worked with in terms of publications, because we just know they will happen. It's no point in measuring their performance on publications. We've only measured their performance on outcomes to society, and we do budget allocation based on outcomes to society. We get rid of the ones who don't want to do that, and we get a cohort. So for 10 years, we've been doing that. So we have to change the metrics. And my last point is getting behind this campaign. So it's a fantastic opportunity. It's led by the UK government, transforming agricultural innovation for people, nature, and climate. Nature positive, climate smart, just food systems. And it's all around changing the innovation systems, much broader than just narrow research. And this is the last step before Glasgow, where a global action agenda for innovation in agriculture will be launched. And you can all get behind it if you go on the website and search ClimateShot. That's the short for the campaign. You can see how you can commit to the campaign and shape what comes out in Glasgow. Onwards to action and changing the research system. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Let's go ahead and change the research systems. Let's transform the agricultural research and innovation systems, and that's what ClimateShot is all about. But how do we do that? In order to find that out and get perspectives from different stakeholders, we'll now go into the panel discussion. And I'll be handing over to the moderator of the panel discussion, Dr. Zitouni Al-Dada, who's the Deputy Director for the Office of Climate and Biodiversity at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Zitouni is in Rome, so he will be joining us virtually. So over to you, Zitouni.
Well, thanks very much, Danush, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us in Milan and also remotely at our event today, All for Climate, ClimateShot, Accelerating Agricultural Innovation at COP26. Thank you very much, Jill Morris and Bruce Campbell, for setting the scene and highlighting some of the critical elements and themes that we still need to address to raise ambition to be able to face the challenge and address the challenge that is in front of us all. I like the comments made on producing output for society. At the end of the day, everything we do has to reach people. And if it doesn't reach people and change people's lives, then it's not really impactful enough. And that means that we need to change the business model, particularly into the innovation system, as you heard. So it's my great pleasure to moderate this session today. So we will start with 2 rounds of questions with our panelists, whom I will introduce in a minute. And then we'll have Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat, and also colleagues who are in Milan, you can raise your hand and then I'll link up with Danush and then we'll give you the floor to ask you a question. And after that, we'll finish with closing remarks and way forward towards COP26 by Victoria Prentice, who is the Minister of State at the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA. So let me first welcome our panelists and introduce them. So we have Ayman Tarwat Amin, who's Minister Plenipotentiary, Deputy Director of the Department of Environment and Sustainable Development at the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ariana Giolodori, who's the Secretary General at the World Farmers Organization. Lisa Sweet, Head of Future Protein, COVID Response and Food Health, Food Systems Initiative at the World Economic Forum. And Tamer Araghi, Managing Director at Acumen Resilient Agricultural Fund. So welcome to all our panelists, and please put your cameras on and so we can all see you. So as I said, we'll start with some questions. I'll ask you a question each, and I would like to respond in 3 minutes or so. It would be really good to have this as a lively discussion and dynamic. So I may bring in some questions that the audience will pose so we can make this really interactive. Even though we allow time afterward for questions, it depends. If there is really burning question, relevant one I see on the chat, I might ask you this question and bring you in. So let me start with the 2 panelists who are already on site there in Milan. Let me start with Lisa. Lisa, there was Jill Morris spoke particularly on joining the dot between the Food System Summit and COP26. And the Food System Summit just held last week in New York. What are the key outcomes you see emerging? They have emerged from the Food System Summit process. And how can we best connect the work that has been achieved under the Food System Summit with COP26? Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Zitouni, and it's great to be here. And although it's interesting doing these dynamics, half virtual, half in person, hopefully we'll get used to this way of being. So I'm going to pick up for the Food System Summit key outcomes on Bruce's last comment around innovation systems not being fit for purpose. And one of the beautiful things that we saw coming out of the UN Food Systems Summit last week was the recognition that innovation is recognized as a key enabler to transform the food systems. But how we defined innovation was the holistic view, not an old school view that was only thinking in a very targeted, linear focus at high-tech solutions or one piece of the puzzle, but how do we think about innovation with a much broader view, including bringing in the local and traditional knowledge into the ecosystem in terms of the importance of policy and institutional innovation. And Bruce was talking about the 90% focus on science and how we shift that. Those types of innovations. How do we think about innovation for partnership? How do we think about innovation for society? So the World Economic Forum led the innovation lever for change at the UN Food Systems Summit, and there were three main outcomes that came out of that. The first was that countries were actively supporting the need to strengthen innovation ecosystems through regional food innovation hubs and unlocking resources to create these ecosystems. The second was that there was a significant data and digital coalition that emerged that's to be co-led by the FAO and others. And this includes linkages such as the digital and data marketplace, which was driven by Consumers International and others, really setting out the playbook to link the consumers and the farmers and other tools. And then the third was the recognition of the farmer's voice, which you'll hear strongly from Ariana later in this panel. That came through incredibly strongly. And that led to the creation of a coalition, the 100 Million Farmers, that's really promoting innovation and local and regional public-private partnerships to drive scale and seek to drive the transition towards net zero nature-positive food systems. The platform recognizes that putting the farmer at the center of the innovation and co-creating solutions together with the farmers is really the necessary tool to break the silos between the food systems and the climate agenda, and can help to bridge the path between the UN Food Systems Summit through to COP26 and well beyond into the next decade.
Thanks very much, Lisa. That makes me now think about the next question for Eamon from Himin, particularly on the connection to COP26. Eamon, you're coordinating the G77 and China position for agriculture, in particular for COP26. What are the examples of key initiatives that you see really needing acceleration and scale up for agricultural innovation that you believe more organizations and more countries should commit to in the lead up to COP26 and beyond?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me here, representing, I wouldn't say represent G77 and China, but definitely making the voices of the developing countries being heard as well on this arena. Zaytouni, you said your question is really very important, but let me tell you something. There is no one size fits all. We know that we are dealing with different agriculture systems around the world. And it's very difficult to say that one works for one country would work for another. This is very difficult and challenging. Under the negotiations that we have for agriculture under the umbrella of the UNFCCC, we always focusing on adaptation and adaptation co-benefits. So the innovations that we are talking about is not only driven for the mitigation aspect, but principally they are driven to the adaptation aspects and what comes as co-benefits for mitigation in this regard. This is in order to ensure our food security. So we have to take this into consideration while we are actually addressing the type of innovation. The challenges in developing country parties, in Egypt and many other countries around the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, is the land fragmentation. I cannot come to a farmer and say to him, just like you have 1.5 hectares of land and you'd like to mitigate and to cut down emissions. If this is not accompanied by a series of steps that can elevate his income and increase the productivity of the land itself, I think that will go nowhere, even if we have a good innovation strategies in plan. So we have just to focus on the small farmers. We have to tell them how they can reach the outside market, how to increase their income in the future. Well, we had, of course, a series of workshops under COP26. We've been talking about innovations. We've been talking about how, for example, we limit the type of emissions as well as to increase the productivity. And here comes the trick. For example, if you are talking about soil carbon, it's very difficult to measure. And in the same time, the results are not quite assured of something like this. So I see somebody holding the banner. Just give me one more minute to try to reflect on that. So when we address innovation, it has to come in the bigger and broader framework of the value chain. Having the value chain to focus on the developing country parts and the farmers, the smallholders in those countries, definitely we can reach something at the end. And always try to focus on something here. When you mentioned the food summit in New York that we had actually tackled since few days from now, the word food security plays a major role. And I want you all to focus on that. When we discuss innovation, we have to discuss it in adaptation co-benefits as possible, and as well to ensure food security. So this is the way forward that we always see in the developing countries. And thank you so much for that. It's back to you, Zaytouni.
Well, thank you, Ayman. You're right. There are different agri-food systems around the world, and thank you for highlighting some of the challenges that need to be addressed in the context of innovation. Adriana, Lisa talks about putting farmers at the center of innovation. So obviously we need to reach out to farmers and to make sure they're a central part of the picture of innovation. And your work at the World Farmers Organization, just want to ask you, how do we make sure that agriculture and farmers are at the top of the climate agenda at COP26? Over to you, Adriana.
Thanks, Zaytouni. It's an honor to share the panel with so many esteemed colleagues. I'm tempted to say that to have farmers and agriculture on top of the agenda, what we need is the political will to have agriculture and farmers at the top of the agenda at COP26 and beyond. What I can share is from the farmers' perspective, what we've been doing to make sure to raise the voice and to raise the bar of the ambition of the farmers first and towards governments and institutions. We've come a long way since the times of Rio, when agriculture was not even mentioned as a fundamental piece, fundamental component in the equation in climate change. And now that all of a sudden agriculture is evoked everywhere, mostly as Bruce was reminding us, for being responsible for 1/3 of the emissions, or responsible so not to do enough. What we as World Farmers Organizations and together with other fellow farmers and other entities are trying to promote in the framework of what we call the Climakers, a farmer-driven climate change agenda, is a reverse paradigm where farmers propose solutions that are assessed by science, that are contributing to advance in the right direction. That's why, for instance, in the run-up to COP26, so just a few days left, we are working to make sure that farmers can propose guidelines to enhance nationally determined contributions in a way that can bring prosperity to farmers, to the people, and to our planet. The real challenge is therefore for us, not really to have simply agriculture on top of the agenda, but to put farmers at the heart of the conversation on climate. Thanks.
Thank you, Adriana. That's a very good point you made there, particularly that we often talk about agriculture as being an important emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. I think the key message from what you're saying, particularly with the role of farmers, is that agriculture is a critical part of the solution to the climate crisis and food security. And that's why innovation is so critical. And I think Bruce mentioned the power of digital, was it Lisa? I think she mentioned the digitalization and data and connection with consumers. And also, I think when we obviously involve farmers, we have to think about the multiple benefits that we want to achieve by involving farmers. And this brings me nicely to asking Tamer Ravi, our fourth panelist, about investment, and particularly the upcoming Resilient Agriculture Fund, which is a 58 million impact fund that support the climate resilience of smallholder farmers in Africa. So I want to ask you, Tamer, from your experience, how can agriculture innovation help deliver the multiple objectives I've just mentioned for farmers across incomes, adaptation to climate change, and more environmentally sustainable practices?
So thanks, Zaitoun, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to be among such a fine group of presenters today. And yeah, I think it's a very good question. And our fund, the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund, we call it ARAF. We aim at building an ecosystem, okay? And that ecosystem, what we're hoping for is that it helps farmers, smaller farmers in Africa, improve their well-being and at the same time increase their climate resilience by supporting innovative agri-startups. So this is what our fund does. We invest in early growth stage startups, agri-startups in Africa. We invest in those agri-startups where they have business models that provide farmers with access to finance, inputs, agronomy support for sustainable practices, and or markets. As you can tell, these are the pain points. Lack of access to most of these are the main pain points of those smaller farmers. So we always look for businesses or business models that cover, that usually cover aggregation, digital platforms, financial solutions, etc. Again, targeting small farmers in Africa. And we have been seeing a new group of agri-startups that's leading the way. And our investment hypothesis is basically that these type of innovative business models can increase farmers' income, increase their yield, also diversify their source of income, and at the same time reduce their income volatility. All of that combined means that these farmers can develop the ability to anticipate, adapt, and absorb climate shocks. And our fund is a fairly young fund. We only started deploying capital last year. And since we started deploying capital, we invested in 5 companies with operations in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Nigeria. And so far, we have impacted a little bit more than 100,000 smaller farmers. And our target is within the lifetime of the fund, which is 10 years, to impact more than 2 million farmers. In the past 18 months, what we have seen is that those companies that we invested in have different business models, and all of them, show business models that help farmers become more resilient to climate change. And when most of us think of climate change, 2 things that pop to mind first, irrigation and drought-resistant seeds. But these are super important, but it goes beyond that. And if you look at our portfolio companies, you will find a company like SunCulture, which develops and sells solar-powered irrigation systems for smaller farmers. Access to clean water for those smaller farmers, a reliable source and consistent source of water allows them not only on the average to double their yield, but also provide their cows with more clean water, which means from the same cow, consuming the same amount of feed, producing the same amount of green gas, producing 50% more milk. We also invest in a company called Uzima Chicken, which utilizes dual purpose poultry, selling those chicken feed to as backyard chicken to smaller farmers. That provides those farmers with, throughout the year, access to those eggs, which means more nutrition to their kids, but extra eggs that they can sell for income. And at the end of the year, sell that chicken that, because it's dual purpose, it also has meat, so they sell it for the meat. So that diversification of income also help those farmers not only save some money, but also be ready if a climate shock happens, then they have that extra source of income. Last but not least, we invest in a tomato processing company in Nigeria, where they help farmers adapt the right varieties, help them with inputs, financing, also help them, when they rotate with maize, with proper and sustainable practices. So those farmers not only increase their income, but also they've diversified their income, and hence they are more susceptible, they are less susceptible to climate shocks. And more than
back to you. I'll come back to you on the second round. Let me thank you. You highlighted some important point there about the agri-startup, supporting agri-startup and diversifying incomes for farmers as well. There's a couple of things that haven't been mentioned yet since we're talking about innovation. I want to bring up one question and park it for all the panelists, which is, how do we make innovation attractive for young farmers? So if you can think about that, I'll come back to you afterward. And also Jill Morris, in her intervention, she also mentioned the active participation of citizens, consumers. It'd be good to come to that and to ask you all, how do you see us actually motivating citizens to be part of the solution and to take responsibility and accountability? I can't see the screen for colleagues sitting in Milan, but just before we move to the second round, I just want to bring in Bruce. Bruce, if you have any reaction to what you heard already, and apologies because I can't see the whole screen, if you want to take a couple of minutes to react before I move on to the second round. Any reaction to what you heard?
So you continue. I'll think about that and I'll come around to the second time round.
Okay, with pleasure. Thank you. So yeah, I said that there are a couple of things to think about, because you brought up a number of important issues that are really interlinked. But let me go back to the second round now, particularly looking beyond COP26. I think we're raising the profile of innovation in agriculture and making it a central piece at COP26. But looking towards COP27, Ayman, I'd like to ask you, since you are invited in the various international negotiations on agriculture and climate change, do you see agriculture innovation emerging as a key topic in the context of COP27?
Thank you, Zaytouni, for this question. Negotiations under the UNFCCC is binded to what we call Coronivia Work Program. This work program should conclude by COP26. We'll be having the second part of what we so-called New Zealand workshop just a few days before the commence of COP26 in Glasgow. After that, the parties should report to COP26 on the way forward. Definitely in Egypt, we would like to see our COP and implementation COP. So I think that parties will work hand in hand in Glasgow 26 to have things to be finalized and to highlight the way forward after that. This was actually the mandate of the final conclusions presented to COP in 2017 in Fiji, talking about the way forward and what exactly we are expecting in COP26 in Glasgow. So having this report by the end, the good thing that the parties, there is a consensus on the implementation of agriculture. We had agreed that we cannot talk endlessly. We cannot have those workshops being running all the time without seeing implementation on the ground. So here implementation is the key. How we would like to see implementation in agriculture, this is a challenge in itself. And we have a G77 and China various ways to do that. One of these things is to have flagship programs, that it could be adopted worldwide, and to leave each nation to do its own implementation in the way that it is applicable to its agriculture system. One of the things as well is to enabling finance through the GCF to increase the STAR allocation under the GEF. Of course, all of this, but STAR allocation would be here for the biodiversity part and the climate change as well, and maybe some enabling activities. So there is a lot of things that we can do forward and to unlock the potential of agriculture. Once again, putting my national hat, I would like to see the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh that we will be hosting, inshallah, in next year, would be an implementation COP for agriculture. So I hope that we can clear all the issues here in Glasgow. And really, I wish UK all the best in getting the parties in convergence and views on the way forward, and to see concrete conclusions by the end of this roadmap. It's back to you, Zaytouni.
Thank you, Ayman. Let me now bring in Ariana again. It's like we've been talking about technology and transfer of technology to developing countries and farmers, and not everyone is benefiting from the technology available. And I think the same goes for innovation. Although it exists, there is still a significant gap, an adoption gap, that prevents farmers from benefiting from such innovations. So Adriana, I just want to bring you in and ask you, how do we ensure that farmers are empowered to adopt and scale up innovation, bearing in mind that Ayman said earlier that there are different agri-food systems. There isn't just one solution that would fit everyone.
Thanks for the question, which is definitely a very interesting one, and being respectful of the incredible diversity and richness of agricultural systems across the globe. But there's one element that unifies all the farmers, all the family farmers in approaching innovation. Too often, farmers are targets of the innovation or beneficiaries, or sometimes even considered end users. But what we preach, what we plead for, is a farmer-driven innovation where farmers and their needs and expectations are in close contact with science in order to shape the research and innovation agenda. When there's a gap in the adoption of innovation, sometimes it depends on the fact that we haven't reached the farmers. And here there's an incredible role to be played by farmers' organizations that should be empowered to go the last mile between a nice project and a successful implementation everywhere. It's easier for a farmer organization to reach the most remote rural areas and all the small-scale producers, all the smallholders, than maybe for the government itself. But on the other hand, when there's an innovation gap, Zaytouni, and with this I'll stop and hand it over to you. When there's an innovation gap, there might be a misalignment between the demand for innovation coming from the farmers and the offer that is approaching them. Are we really answering their needs? That's my question, because farmers are innovators by nature. They have always been, but they need the right answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Absolutely. I think, we talk about putting farmers at the center, but we need to reach out to them, and also they need to understand the benefits of innovation. You mentioned earlier that innovation is not only about hard technologies, the local knowledge and the indigenous knowledge as well, and that also includes innovation. And I mentioned earlier also the multi-benefits that we need to make sure farmers get. So presenting innovation has to be in that local context so that farmers understand what innovation means to them and how can they benefit from it. So it doesn't have to be very hard, expensive agriculture. And also we need to make sure wherever we suggest to farmers, we want them to benefit from, so it doesn't involve risks to them, particularly smallholder farmers. And that brings me to the next question to Tamer or Ravi on de-risking business. So from your experience, Tamer, at RIF, so how can initiatives like yours help de-risk business models and markets to attract increased investment, particularly into adaptation-focused enterprises? So including, from GCF and other large sources of climate finance. And before I give you the floor, let me just remind people joining us to put questions in the chat. I can see some of them coming up, and I'll try to select some and ask our panelists because we're approaching the Q&A. So please share with us your questions, your thoughts, views, anything you would like to put there. Be useful to hear from your perspective and your experience. So Tamer, over to you.
Thanks, Zakouni, and sorry I got disconnected due to the network. Well, blended finance is extremely important, and actually there is a research that was recently conducted and published by Acumen and the Busara Center, Research Center for Behavior Economics, that showed that farmers need not only access to continuous training, but also they need also that training to adapt sustainable practices. So, and that training comes at a cost, okay? But at the same time, we have seen that you have to have this blended finance structure so that you de-risk the sector. So I'll give you an example, Zakouni. If you look at how we structured our fund, we started with a first loss layer by the Green Climate Fund and Acumen, which catalyzed the space for other investors, other like commercial impact investors, to invest in our fund, so that our fund can invest in companies that support smaller farmers. So de-risking the sector is extremely important. That's the importance of blended finance. But as I mentioned, the research that Acumen and Busara did, which by the way was funded by FCDO, show that the importance of farmers training. So now what we did is we added an extra layer of blended finance, where we went out and raised grant money to develop a technical assistance facility, $5 million facility, that part of that money is dedicated to training smaller farmers working with our investee companies. So when you look at all of that combined, so you are using the first loss layer to de-risk the sector, at the same time the TA facility is used to train farmers. The combination of that allows us to invest in very innovative business models that, when all said and done, as I mentioned earlier, helps those smaller farmers adapt to climate change.
Okay, thank you, Tamer. So there are a number of questions here that are also addressed to specific panelists. But let me bring in Lisa first. So Lisa, I've asked Eamon earlier about the prospect towards COP27 and how innovation will feature in there. So I want to ask you sort of similar question about how do we deliver on our ambitions. And so from what you heard from the other panelists, what would you envisage to be the next steps after COP26?
Thanks, and it's really exciting to hear that when we go to Egypt, we're going to be looking at an implementation COP, because that's what's needed. There's a lot of science that's still being debated and determined, but we know enough to directionally change. We know enough to get started. And that's really where the 100 million farmers comes in, is how can we actually create these public-private partnerships and partner in new innovative ways to look at the specific situation in a particular region, a particular country, bring the stakeholders together and get moving, even if we're not 100% certain on everything. We know enough. So really, let's get moving. I do want to pick up on, again, one of the points that Ariana made so eloquently about the knowledge that farmers have. And then, as Tamir was talking about the needs for innovation. And how do we bring these together and think through the peer-to-peer knowledge networks that can be created so that farmers can better share their information with each other and create that trusted resource to be able to enable some of the transitions that are out there. I think my call for everybody is how can we get further involved in public-private farmer partnerships that really deliver that implementation on the ground and that action on the ground that's so critical.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I have a number of questions here in the chat, and so now we enter the Q&A session officially for the next 20 minutes or so. So let me start with some questions here. As I mentioned earlier, the importance of consumers. Someone is asking a question here. We've talked about farmers, but consumers are also key. How do we make sure that consumers actually demand more products from sustainable agricultural practices? This question is directly to Adriana or Lisa. And before I give you the floor, let me just mention the next question. Next question for you, Bruce. How can African government take advantage of its youngest population to boost the agricultural sector and beyond? So let me start with Adriana or Lisa. Start with Adriana first, and very briefly, please, so we can take up other questions. Adriana.
Sure, thanks. What a great question. Farmers and consumers are the people in the food systems. And it is of utmost importance that there can be a better understanding for the farmers about the consumers' expectations around sustainable food, and for the consumers to understand how the food gets to their table and what it takes to produce sustainably, respecting human rights, respecting the environment. So it is fundamental to improve this relationship. And that's why, for instance, the World Farmers Organization is working closely also with Consumers International, for instance, to promote a very transparent and honest dialogue. There are a lot of points that needs to be tackled, including food standards, food education, but I am confident that by promoting these honest and direct relationship, we can achieve what is needed. Over.
Okay, thank you, Adriana. Before I give the floor to Lisa, one of the big issues that concerns consumers is food loss and waste. We still waste too much food. You know, the third of the food that is produced for human consumption is thrown away, basically. And we know that is an important contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, about 8% of the global emissions. Also with that goes all the energy, the water, the soil, the nutrients and everything and the efforts from farmers in producing that food and making it available to us. Lisa?
So in regards to food loss and waste, I mean, I think Ariana made a great point, and I had the pleasure of being at that first dialogue that was held between the World Farmers Organization and Consumers International to bring the farmers and the consumers directly together and have them talking to each other. And I think creating those types of dialogues, which is part of the ClimateShot campaign, is how do we actually create more dialogues like this, helps to really open up the perspective and to stand in somebody else's shoes to really understand where they're coming from, what they're doing, what's important and what's valuable. And as much as possible, if we can open up those direct ties, that's really so crucial. A second element is driving more and increased transparency into the system so that we can connect from farm all the way through plate, provide greater information, more transparency, and that second layer of understanding that would come beyond the direct dialogues that can be created.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Before I give the floor to Bruce, let me state a question here for Tamer and Ayman. There's a question on the importance of education. Question from Elizabeth, who's asking how education can play a role in innovation. What can we change in education and skills policy to stimulate innovation? So this is for Tamer or Ayman. So I'll come back to you after I give the floor to Bruce. Bruce?
Okay, so your question was around youth in agriculture, and particularly focused in Africa. So then I think the next decade in Africa is really an interesting one because of massive urbanization rates, huge growing market for food from urban populations, perhaps wealthier populations demanding new kinds of food. And so if we don't capture that opportunity in terms of building local and regional food systems, we're really lost. And I think we can capture that rather than importing food. And agriculture is going to be hopefully a different kind of agriculture. It's going to be more digital. There's going to be service providers helping farmers access tractor services, mechanization services, helping farmers get insurance, using digital tools to get advisories to farmers. And the youth are fantastic in that area in terms of the whole digital economy. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunities. But I think we have to think beyond purely production. We have to think about the whole food system, linking to the urban areas, new types of technologies and tools. And I think one can build jobs into that. That will keep the youth in the rural areas. And we heard that yesterday from some of our youth participants, very positive about changing the agricultural system and remaining in agriculture. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Before I bring in Ayman and Tamer, is one question here that I would like to ask everyone, every panelist and every panelist who would like to answer the question. Obviously, we're talking about agriculture and agri-food sectors and their transformation, and that involves obviously issues to do with nutrition, with transport, sustainability, etc. So the question is, what other sectors beyond food and agriculture should we be engaging with to drive innovation, and why? So please note that question, and I'll come back to you. But let me give the floor now to Tamer and Ayman about the role of innovation. I'll start with you, Ayman.
Well, thank you so much. I will talk about our national experience in this regard. Today, our Minister of Environment had announced in the pre-COP that there is an education plan that it will be already triggered, and it will be implemented starting from next year. From 7 years old up to 16 years old, the students at the school will be very well aware about all the dimensions of environment. Not only climate change, but it will be climate change, biodiversity, and other important issues as well, like the chemicals, how they should be very careful when they deal with electronic devices and all of this. So it's a whole umbrella that deals with the environment, not only, of course, the climate change. And this is will raise the awareness. And let me tell you something. This morning as well, I heard one of the young people from Sudan. She was mentioning the challenges that they are facing in her country. When everybody was talking about electric cars and this is the future of transportation and we have to be aware of that. And then she said very impulsively, how we can do that, and in Sudan they have only 30% accessibility to electricity. Nevertheless, the logic behind her intervention, but the awareness that it was created out from this type of challenges that she's aware of in her country, this brings the future to us, because awareness of the problems is the beginning of their answering. So this is what we'll be doing in Egypt. We will be focusing on the children, and we'll be focusing about the young people and their type of education, so that we would raise the awareness and to prepare them for what's coming in the future. Back to you, Zaytouni.
Right, thank you, Ayman. Tamer?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and of course, thanks, Ayman. He mentioned or he covered much of that space. One thing I would like to add, that the way we look at it is that, twofolds. The first one is on the macro level, that we want. From what we're seeing in Africa, we see great talent. We see amazing young people coming to the workforce, full of energy, really want to learn and want to participate. And this generation is all about, the awareness of climate change, and those issues are just mind-boggling. It's very impressive. But at the same time, you realize that we need more project-based curricula that focuses on entrepreneurship in schools and at universities, where those students, get involved in specific projects where they develop business plans and where they can do even co-ops or internships with startups. This kind of exposure is needed more for innovation to flourish. But at the same time, for our specific subject, and since climate adaptation is the closest to our heart at IRAF, we need more education, not only at schools, but education even for us as adults. When you look at how much the world invests in climate, only 5% goes towards climate adaptation. Of course, we all want to spend even more on climate mitigation, because not only want to slow it down, climate change, but we want to stop it. However, while this is happening, we have millions of people who are affected by climate change. Most of them are, poor smaller farmers. Let's just go like at a cat. Poor smaller farmers in Africa, in Asia, that are affected the most. So we need to raise awareness about the issue, and that's kind of education that we also need. And the more we think about it, the more people know about it, the more innovation will come to the space. That's how we see, more and more very innovative startups coming with ideas that even when they don't think about climate change at the heart of it, they think about how to help those smaller farmers, adapt to the surroundings and flourish. So that's the kind of innovation we want to see more of.
Right, thank you very much. Danush, can you help me, please, before I move on to the next question for the panelists, just to see the audience there that is live with you. If anyone has a question to the panelists, that would be good.
So, Zaytouni, there are 3 questions here from the floor. So maybe what I can do is invite them to make those questions, and then you can decide how you want to address them. Would that be okay?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
So I see 3 hands. No, 5. Okay. So if you're all quick, maybe we can get
with 3.
Okay, 3. Okay. So please, first, then Thomas. You need to come there. There is a marking on the ground in pink, so you need to stand there. There.
It's here.
There. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Alberto Frausin. I represent the retailers, food retailers in Italy. A simple question. 5 years ago, at the Carlsberg Foundation, I got a presentation very interesting. It was a New York entrepreneur that showing us the hydroponic technology that was developing in the US. Now, 5 years later, to be honest with you, look in Italy or as well Europe, there are very few companies that are successful. Now, my key question, I agree on innovation, scale, whatever. Now, the best full of success of the innovation is basically success. So at the end of the day, the more, is this technology not relevant? Because from an environmental point of view, I saw data that are outstanding. So which is the reason why this innovation in 5 years really, in my view, did step insignificant. So at the end of the day, for our consumer in Italy, nobody is eating salad of tomatoes with this technology.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe we just go to Thomas next. And who are the others? I see Sophie. Maybe Sophie next, and we'll ask Zitouni if there's time for more. Yeah, please, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danush. I'm Thomas Westhoff. I'm the Vice President of EAS, which is the largest student organization in the field of agriculture. And what we see is that youth has a lot of good ideas. We are digital natives. We are learning the latest scientific discoveries at our universities. But what we are lacking are resources, financial resources, access to land. And my question to the panelists are, how are you making sure that those new generations of farmers are getting access to resources that we need now? And also the road to COP, we have a delegation going there, but we are struggling with financial resources too. So also our visibility on those events are pressured by the lack of resources we face now. So for the ClimateShot, we need action now, as we need for the climate, of course.
Okay.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank
more,
you.
Sophie. And Zitouni, after this, you can decide if we have time for more. We have 2 more questions here from the floor.
Yeah, let's have 3, and then we'll have second round.
Okay.
If you can be brief about the question, so we can go back again.
Okay.
Sophie.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you for holding this event. It's been really, really interesting to talk about innovation. But what I've heard little about is people in the most vulnerable situations, people who are in marginalized settings, and especially women. How can innovations that are a lot of finances are going into reach the people who need them the most, especially young women? Thank you.
Over to you,
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's take up these 3 questions, Danush, and then we'll have a second round. So what I will ask the panelists is obviously not for everyone to answer each of the 3 questions, but just take one of them, okay, so we can be brief and then go back again. So there is one about food retailers, particularly on the hydroponic technology and its relevance, and one on the youth and how to help them have access to resources and land and participation. And the third one about people in most vulnerable situations, particularly women, and how we can make them benefit from innovation. Lisa, any question you would like to take up?
Sure. I'm going to pick up on the last question around the most vulnerable and really speak to an issue that I think we're talking about here, which is really around how do you link different agendas together and bring different stakeholders who are looking at an issue from a particular angle into looking at that issue from a different angle. So one of the things that we've been talking about at the World Economic Forum is around the Sahel and how do we help stakeholders to plant trees in the region, to develop their incomes, to give them livelihoods, to bring new food sources into the region. And critically, as it relates to actually connecting some of these agendas, is looking at the migration challenge that's happening right now out of the Sahel because of the fragile states that are within that region, and starting to get stakeholders who are looking at the issue from a migration challenge issue to look at how they could unpack that if they could start to look at the solutions, not necessarily coming from the migration angle, but coming from the food security angle at the end of the day. So that's kind of one of the pieces that I'll pick up on. I'm just going to do one other quick shift around the bringing together different agendas and go back to that question that was on the chat earlier around what other industries need to be brought to bear. And when we talk about the SDGs,
let me come back to you, Lisa. Let me come back to you on that later. Let's go this one first and make sure I'm fair to everyone so everyone can answer questions. I'll come back to you on that if you don't mind. Sure. Anybody else want to answer the other questions, please? Just put your hands up so I can see you on the screen. Adriana?
Yes, thank you, Zitouni. Again, also building on what Lisa has just said, agriculture and seeing agriculture as a business is a fundamental and powerful solution to many issues, including those evoked by Thomas and by the young lady talking about youth and women. to attract young people and let them stay in agriculture, and to value the already pivotal role of women in agriculture, we need to solve systemic issues again, and we need several actors to be involved. Again, I suggest from the farmers' perspective to work with the farming communities, with the women, to identify the specific local solutions that fit for purpose, not to go there with from the top down approaches, but basically matching human rights with economic opportunities in order to advance towards sustainability. Over.
Okay, thank you. Ayman, and then we'll move on to the next question. Ayman? Sorry, Tamer, rather.
Sure. No, I would like to share our experience at IRAF when it comes to the marginalized parts of our society, and we'll share with you two things. The first one is we have noticed that one of the effects of COVID is that we've seen the younger generation moving out of cities, going back to their villages, looking at agriculture as a sustainable source of income. Because those who were working for hotels, restaurants, etc., at one point they couldn't find a job, and they look at agriculture as a sustainable source of income. And this is a golden opportunity that we see in our investee companies see to actually promote that culture within the younger generation, that actually agriculture is a trade where you can actually make money. But at the same time, you have the issue of awareness, the issue of also gender inequality, and part of our technical assistance facilities actually used specifically to promote not only farmers training, but also gender initiatives. So we have climate initiatives, but also we have gender initiatives, because it's not only about the know-how, it's also about behavior change. And that's part that we focus a lot on in these programs, is that we have to change the perception of how those communities perceive women and perceive women in agriculture and in the workforce, generally speaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tamer. And obviously, there was a question about how to reach the most vulnerable people, particularly women, and can benefit from innovation, particularly within the context of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. The main principle is to leave no one behind. So obviously, you need to reach out to those who are really in need of help, so we can make an impact. So I just want to make this point that in every project or every practical things we put on the ground, including reaching farmers, women would need more support for that than men. Danush, we could take 2 more questions. We have a couple of minutes, but before we do that, I'm going to give the floor to Lisa for 1 minute. Lisa, if you can continue your intervention about what other sectors beyond food and agriculture should we be engaging with to drive innovation, and why? 1 minute, Lisa, over to you.
So I was just going to say that food really touches all 17 SDGs, which when you think about it means that we actually have to get all sectors involved in delivering the changes that are needed for the food systems to really achieve the SDGs. 2 that I'll call out in particular, and I'm not going to say that this just relates to the industry side, it also relates to the ministerial side. One is the finance industry. And how do we get the finance industry really delivering on food systems outcomes, recognizing that there's different time frames for investment that need to happen, different de-risking models, and really understanding the risk and unpacking the risk if we don't invest in this sector. The second is the health and healthcare industry and the health and healthcare ministries. And how do we start to educate those stakeholders and bring them in to help design solutions that look at prevention, which can come through food and come through climate smart food when you think about pollution and other aspects.
Great, thanks very much, Lisa. Danush, over to you. If colleagues could ask questions to specific panelists, that will make my life easier, and we have 3 minutes left.
Yes, thanks, Attorney. So we have a gentleman coming, joining us, and very quickly, and the lady, please, after that.
My name is Maloba Ludovico from the British Embassy. I have a question for Bruce. You mentioned that the next decade is going to be very important for Africa in terms of innovation. And I'm just thinking about the youth, because at the moment, Africa, I think we have like 40% cell phone coverage. And when you think about it, what is it that we're missing? Is it that we're playing catch up, or the research indicated that there was potential for this, especially when you look at the information that the youth can share amongst themselves, the social media, in terms of resolving like veterinary problems, sharing pictures, to share best practices. What exactly has led to this slow rate in using technology? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question, or that's it?
Yeah, that's the last one.
Hi, I'm Chloe Stalin from the FCDO-supported Spark program on pastoralism in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. So thanks for referencing that context. It's been really interesting to hear from everyone. And going into COP, we are a bit concerned about the vilification of livestock and meat and the milk products, given that there are quite different impacts from different production systems in different parts of the world. A liter of milk produced in the Netherlands or Wisconsin has much different impacts than those produced in extensive livestock systems. And so I'm just curious, as we try to incorporate farmers more, indigenous knowledge more, in what ways are we continuing to refine our understanding of food systems and identifying the right problems so that investments in innovation are really addressing issues that are affecting our climate going forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, you want to answer briefly, please?
Yeah, so I'm a Zimbabwean, and I think there's not a simple solution. It starts right at the top in terms of governance, policies, institutions, infrastructure, are another sector that has to be involved in terms of the digital infrastructure. One has to get all of that right in order to get finance into the system and to get the local food markets working. So ultimately, we have to have regional and food markets that work for farmers so that they can invest in the technologies. So it's getting all those things right, and to get them right really needs strong governance, policy settings to make the frameworks going in the right direction. And I see it happening in places within Africa where there are some real nice successes in that, but there's other places where we need a long way to go. And that also takes us way beyond the food system into very different policy settings that we have to get right. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Bruce. And so now to do the closing, and excuse me, to do the closing, and I'm very pleased to invite colleagues to hear a video from Victoria Prentice, Minister of State at the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So she will be doing the closing and way forward to COP26. So let's hear the short video, please.
I'm pleased to join you virtually at this ClimateShot event for the pre-COP26. Last week at the UN Food Systems Summit, we heard a strong message that unlocking investment and partnerships in innovation is essential to transform food systems to deliver for people, nature and climate. We will bring these actions to COP26. The UK's priority is to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. Our environmental goals can only be achieved together. We've already taken huge strides in the right direction, as seen through our collaborative efforts in research and innovation. To reduce the innovation gap, we must invest in research and innovation that focuses on farmers' needs and delivers impact at scale. We need to develop new partnerships that bring donors, researchers, farmers and businesses together to deliver solutions, whether that's new climate-resilient crop varieties, new approaches to pest threats, or improved access to weather forecasts. All are vital to tackling the biggest crisis of our time. In England, we've recently invested in our Farming Innovation Pathways competition, which should help to boost research and innovation that farmers really need. Looking internationally, we're working with other partners in coalitions. The first of these is the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, started by the US and UAE, which is a really great example of how we can increase investment in technologies that we so desperately need. Another example is the Forest Agriculture and Commodity Trade Dialogue. We must act now to promote development and trade in a way that protects our forests and biodiversity. A third example, the 100 Million Farmers platform will work with the private sector to aid climate-resilient crops and other technologies. This will help us to achieve net zero and nature-positive food systems by 2030. We must do more to bring our food, climate and innovation agendas together to transform agricultural innovation systems for people, nature and climate. As the Minister for Agriculture and a farmer myself, I know how important it is to drive a just rural transition in a way that supports the people that keep us fed while tackling the biggest crisis of our time. Therefore, I'm calling on governments, businesses, international organisations and research partners to join us in the global action agenda for agricultural innovation. To reach our ambitious climate goals, we need to listen to and be inspired by the voices of our youngest generation. That's why the UK have allied with CGIAR to invite our youth to transform agriculture for the better. I would like to finish by inviting you to visit our ClimateShot website and share your innovation stories with the world. The UK are excited to continue this brilliant work at COP26 to kickstart change in our agricultural sector. We're up for the challenge and we really hope you are too.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Victoria Prentice, for your closing remarks, and you highlighted a number of innovative initiatives as well to add to the dialogue that we've been having and the various activities and initiatives that were shared with us as well. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to all our panelists. And let me also thank the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and CCAFs for hosting this event. It's been a pleasure to moderate, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you also to Danush, to Vita, Reese, and the whole team who's behind the scene to make this event happen. I hope you found it useful. I hope you learned something new. And let me now hand over to Danush to close. Danush, over to you.
Thank you, Zituni, and let me just say thank you to you for this excellent moderation and this hybrid format that we are all just learning about. I think that went really smoothly. Thank you so much for your support. And thanks also to colleagues from the UK Embassy in Italy, Federica, Ludovico, Claire, and also Tom England, who's not with us. Thanks for all the support to make this happen. We really appreciate that. So just a couple of housekeeping announcements. So I hope you're all convinced to become allies of the global action agenda and join this ClimateShot effort in the lead up to the COP. So go to climateshot.earth, that's the microsite for the campaign, and join us as allies. And as the minister said, you can also share your innovation stories on the website. So please do join us. And we have an in-person event. I know some of the questions haven't been fully answered. So we have some refreshments at the back. So I encourage the speakers to also head that way, and the participants as well, and grab a drink, and maybe you can continue these conversations. I also ask that once you have taken some refreshments, maybe you step outside for a better conversation. So thanks to everyone. I hope that was useful. Thank you.